How you doing, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the pardon me. Welcome back to another episode of uh wow. I am tripping out today. And I think the biggest reason is because I have an incredible guest. But welcome back to another episode of the Grief Empowerment Theory. And this is J. Lewis III, and today I am with Professor Dave Roberts. Professor Roberts has the most interesting story. He has been able to fuse his ability, his science mind of being a psychologist, with understandings of the afterlife after going through particular experiences. Uh, Dave, do you mind if I call you Dave or Professor Roberts?
No, geez, call me Dave.
Okay. Well, Dave, let me ask you. Just describe your story and talk to the audience a little bit, please.
Okay, Jay, first of all, thank you for having me on the Grief Empowerment Theory podcast. I've been looking forward to this since we talked about it. And of course, I was one of your first guests when you had another podcast that you had been doing, and we had a great conversation then. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation now. Um, but life kind of went in a very predictable fashion for me. I'm going to give you like a little bit of a just background of who I am. What seems to be like a previous lifetime, I was an addictions counselor and clinical supervisor for the state of New York. I had worked in that capacity for 27 years until I retired in July of 2012. In 2003, I began teaching at Utica. It was then Utica College. It's now Utica University in the psychology department. And I'm still at Utica University. Um, I've been there, for over 21 years. And now I teach in the psychology, child life, and the health studies department. And two courses that I teach predominantly are care of the human spirit and death, dying, and bereavement. I've been a workshop presenter. I'm an author, and I know we'll get more into that because that's a big part of the story in terms of how I got to this point. In terms of the whole story around, what's in the book. Um, so I mean, I've done a variety of different things. As again, my life was progressing in a very predictable, orderly fashion until May of 2002. And I'm going to give you three very specific dates that will tell our viewers in terms of how life can turn on a dime. On May 2nd, 2002, my first grandchild was Brianna was born to my daughter Janine Marie Roberts. She was born on May 2nd, 2002. Now, during Janine's pregnancy, and Janine was 18 at the time she delivered Brianna, at the time of her pregnancy, she had injured her right foot in a freak accident, and her right foot continued to swell. It did not respond to traditional treatments for a foot injury. It didn't respond to a walking boot, rest, elevation, none of that. They did an MRI with Janine's consent after Brianna was born. They did an MRI after she was born. They found an undefined 8 centimeter mass at the bottom of her foot. They did a biopsy, I think shortly after that. The biopsy was highly suggestive for cancer. On May 19th, I was conferred my master's of social work degree from SUNY Albany. On May 26th, we got the diagnosis that my daughter had a rare and aggressive form of cancer called the velar rhabdomyosarcoma, which out of all the sarcomas was the most aggressive sarcoma that she could have. Sarcomas were a rare occurrence, Jay, of cancer. There was probably, the research I did, there were 2,500 new cases per year. The area that I live in, and I live in a rural area in upstate New York, about 5 hours from New York City. We specialize mainly in colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer. Those are the cancers that we're uniquely equipped to deal with from a medical standpoint here. The oncologist that we talked to said, look, I frankly don't have the resources that I can to deal with this type of diagnosis. They referred us to the Dana-Farber Research Institute in Boston, which is one of the best hospitals in the world for pediatric sarcoma research and treatment. In a 5-minute consult, we were told by the oncologist that Janine had a stage 4 tumor with bone marrow and lymph node involvement, and there was absolutely no cure for her cancer unless they could get her cancer into remission until they could find a cure. That was the only hope that we had. So what my daughter heard, what I heard, what her significant other heard, and my wife heard, was that in all likelihood, Janine was going to die. And further research that I did, the 5-year survival rate for her type of cancer was 10 to 15%, which meant that there was an 85 to 90% chance that she would die within 5 years. She went through 6 very aggressive rounds of chemotherapy, which put her cancer in 80% remission. But unless the number is 100% remission, you have 20% of the cancer that was still remaining. In no time flat, it remetastasized and then she was given a prognosis in early January of 1 to 3 months. In February of 2003, she declined to do any further treatment, and she transitioned, and I call it transitioned, from the physical body into the spiritual world with hospice services and hospice personnel present on March 1st, 2003 at 12:30 in the morning. So I've been walking the path of a parent who's experienced the transition of a child for over 21 years, and there is not anything I haven't explored about life, death, or life after death. So I'm an open book, Jay. You can ask me anything at this point. But that's the background story. How I got to this point is a story of true wonderment and serendipity. So, and we'll get to that when you are ready to go with that. So,
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. At what point did you make the decision to come to peace with what has happened with your daughter? Or was it a situation where you had to have these other things happen in order for you to get to that point of peace?
I think it was a combination of both, Jay, that occurred. I'm going to fast forward to 2010. That's 7 years after my daughter Janine's transition. I was probably doing what was expected of any parent who had experienced the transition of a child at that time. I was going to a good bereaved parent support group to try to connect with other individuals who shared my pain. I tried to talk with individuals who were farther along in my grief so I could see what tools they use that helped them get to that point. I read books on grief. I read books by other bereaved parents. I was starting to write articles. I was starting, for publications. I was starting to do workshops for the Compassionate Friends. And later on, the Bereaved Parents of the USA, 2 organizations that are excellent at supporting families who've experienced the death of a child or the transition of a child, as I refer to it. I was doing everything, organizing conferences, but something was missing. My head didn't know it, but my soul knew it before my head knew it. I would explain how this happened. I was on a committee organizing a conference called Beyond Words: Creative Approaches to Dealing with Grief. This occurred in September of 2010 at the Turning Stone Resort and Casino in Oneida, New York. Through pure serendipity, on August 25th, I met an interfaith minister over the phone by the name of Reverend Patty Farino. And Reverend Farino was trying to register for the conference, and everything. Registration was online. And when we connected, she told me that she picked out her workshops. She double checked her credit card information, hit the link to register. Her computer screen went blank. Now, she had gotten the information from another colleague of hers who worked who was a chapter leader for the Bereaved Parents of the USA in Long Island. And at the time, Patty was doing her ministry work on a volunteer basis with the Angel of Hope through Angela's house in Long Island. The Angel of Hope is a statue that is erected, and it's in commemoration of those children who have passed on or died or transitioned. And she was working with parents who were referred by Angela's house to her Angel of Hope ministry. Um, we we talked for about 45 minutes. And understand, Jay, this call would not have even happened had her computer screen not went blank. So we figured then it was divine intervention that was getting us together. We talked for about 45 minutes. She asked, Dave, do you believe in signs? I said, Patty, I really don't align with that type of philosophy. I'm a science based. I got a background in psychology. I don't really believe in any of the spiritual afterlife kind of stuff. I said, but I think there was one time on Father's Day in 2009 where my daughter sent me a double rainbow because my wife and her sister were out on the back porch, out on the deck, and said, Dave, you got to come here. You got to come here. I think your Jean's sending you a double rainbow. And there wasn't a cloud in the sky, Jay, but there was this double rainbow that was cascading across the yard and into the great beyond. So I talked with, but there was other things that were occurring shortly after Janine transitioned. I had butterflies following me around the block when I was walking my granddaughter. Um, I heard a song on the radio that we both enjoyed just at the moment that I was thinking of her. So I'm thinking, geez, these are unusual circumstances, but I don't know what to make of this. I don't know how to integrate this into my science based background. Okay, so getting back now to 2010, day after the conference, I'm taking three very spiritually grounded percenters up north to see the change of colors. Because in upstate New York, the leaves really and trees turn brilliant colors. It's almost like a watercolor painting. And they were having this intense conversation in the back of their car about spirituality. So all of a sudden, I looked up at the sky, and I might have been talking to God, the universe, somebody. I said, I want to be where they are. Came out of my mouth. So as I mentioned earlier, my soul knew what I was needing before the rest of my body could catch up to it. Okay. So all I wanted was to have more spiritual knowledge so that I could move forward in my journey because my soul sensed I was stuck. So in the meantime, Patty had told me we had our conversation or during our conversation that if you ever get up to Long Island, I'd love to show you my Long Island. Now, I'm going to go jump back, and I'm jumping back and forth, but I'm jump back to the day of the conference again. Patty gave me a hug. I told her, I said, when I see you at the conference, I'm going to give you a great big bear hug. She was in the session that I was moderating. It was the last session of the day. And I said, Patty Farino? She goes, yeah. I said, I'm Dave Roberts. I gave her this great big hug. So she whispers in my ear, I think your daughter sent me a rainbow. Now I'm thinking, Jay, I'm whipped at the end of the conference. I'm tired. And I'm saying, oh, yeah, that's great. So she told me more as we got to know each other about the story. On September 3rd, she was coming back from her trip that her and her husband, Marco, had in New Jersey. There was not a cloud in the sky. And all of a sudden, they saw this great big double rainbow just cascading across Route 17 in New Jersey. They were so in awe of that whole picture that they stopped the car, they videoed it, they took pictures of it. As Patty is videoing it, she took pictures as she was sitting on top of her car and taking pictures and videoing it. She told me, she goes, I heard this voice in my head saying, I need you to talk to my father. And she said, well, I would be happy to talk to your father. And I'm paraphrasing this, but who is your father? She goes, it's the gentleman that you talked to about the conference. So the stage was already set. My daughter came through her and said, you need to talk to my father. I need you to talk to my father. So as push came to shove on November 10th, I found myself in Long Island. Patty and I had gone to a workshop or a program that at the time a colleague of ours was doing and that Patty was involved with directly through the Angel of Hope. After the conference was over, about 9:30 at night, I came into her house, sat down, and all of a sudden, for that entire weekend, the essence of my daughter was present through Patty, um, telling me a lot of different things. But essentially, the message was that you're doing a great job grieving me, but you have other categories in your life to attend to. You're a father, you're a husband, you're a grandfather. I've got two brothers that you need to pay more attention to. She goes, I'm always going to be here with you. That was the message. But it, but you need to take care of all categories in your life. I'm always going to be here, and you can always find me. And that was the message. And I believed it immediately what was going on for two reasons. One, I talked to Patty for 45 minutes, and what came out during that weekend with her wasn't anything I even talked with her about. The second thing, Jay, is that I had asked for this because you go back to that day after the conference when I looked up at the sky, I said to the universe, to God, I want to be where they are. I have discovered that intention is the most powerful form of prayer. That if we state our intention, the universe is going to find some way to manifest that for us. But what I didn't bargain for is that what I asked for and what I got exceeded what I asked for. I wanted more knowledge of spirituality. I got a whole new perspective that allowed me to see that I could transform the relationship with my daughter. I could maintain a connection with her, and I could maintain the relationship with her, albeit differently, while finding peace. And that weekend led to a series of marathon conversations that we had over the next 10 years about how psychology and spirituality, the worlds could merge, to help individuals and help me continue to refine my perspective and find peace, and help individuals find peace amidst the challenges of life that inevitably crop up. Um, and so I learned that psychology and spirituality could coexist, that together they could explain the greater wonders of the universe, and maybe either one of those disciplines separately. Um, and that the work that I did with Patty also translated into ancestral healing for me, where I was able to forgive my father for leaving when I was 5 years old. 55 years later, understand the context of why he left. And I realized that it wasn't out of an act of abandonment, it was an act of love. And that's why he left. And also to forgive my mother's decision to overprotect me after he left, and to not remarry again. So all of the work that I did with Patty and her encouragement, her tutelage, all of that translated into, her encouragement to find other spiritual teachers, which in addition to Patty led me to refine and develop the perspective that I have today. Now, what I also need to let your viewers understand is just because I have accepted and that my daughter is no longer a physical presence in this world, that I have made the conscious choice to re-engage in life with purpose and meaning, with a passion to serving others who have experienced life-altering transition, and to impose to impart that knowledge to the students that I teach. There are still days where I yearn for my daughter's physical presence, where I can become sad. I can revert to the early days of grief. But I realize that joy, sadness, all of those emotions that aren't necessarily happiness can coexist, and we can learn to live with that, to integrate it, and to learn from it, and to realize that it is a part of life. The other thing that Patty will tell you, and I always say this, is that Patty does not want to be seen as a medium. What she has done, she does because she has a sincere wish to help people. I'm not saying that mediums don't, but she's not in it for the entertainment value. She takes what she does very seriously, as part of her ministry. And I'm forever grateful for the day that she came into my life, because I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you with this type of perspective. I would not. I mean, I would probably be, I would probably be functional, but I wouldn't have the perspective that I would have right now. So that's my story, Jay, and I'm sticking to it for
Sure.
now.
Hey, understandable. I mean, incredible story, first off. And Dave, what's interesting about all of it is you use the word serendipity. It is serendipitous. You figure when you talk about the fact that from a chance phone call and a computer crashing,
Yep.
it manifested into a, a, a book writing, focus between both you and Patty.
Mm-hmm.
And what's incredible about that, also, she enlightened you on a different aspect of your thinking
Absolutely.
by allowing you to be able to understand that, you know what, your scientific background can lay to interpretation
Mm-hmm.
different aspects of things. And of course, you you look at the fact that you had some things happen to you, um, like you said, some signs,
Mm-hmm.
the butterfly issue and the music and things like that, and you're like these chance coincidences, you know. But over time, I think you kind of look now at these chance coincidences as possible avenues
Mm-hmm.
of communication with your daughter,
Yep.
and the fact that you spent some time with Patty and Patty showed you some things that were different,
Oh yeah.
some things that presented possibility to you.
Mm-hmm.
Do me a favor before I go on all day about you. Let me ask you this. Talk to me about you and Pastor Farino's um, book, the When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. Talk about that.
I had over the years in our conversations, I said to Pat, and I said, we really ought to write a book. I think it would help people to understand what you did for me, that there can be peace after loss, that we can learn to integrate additional beliefs into our core belief systems and not replace our core belief systems, but in addition to, we add, and that's one of the things she taught me. It's what we can add in addition to, we can add beliefs in addition to our core beliefs for belief expansion. I said, so, she's always been a person that's been very private. She has never been one for going in public with her knowledge and her intuitive abilities. She's never been one for that. But finally, during the pandemic, she thought, yeah, it's time. So she was she was in Long Island, but she moved to South Carolina. So we did this book remotely. We through Google Docs. We put everything together. Um, we self-published it on Amazon. We did the book launch on March 1st, 2021, and we picked March 1st because March 1st was the date that Janine transitioned. Um, and the rest is history. Her husband Marco did the graphic design work for us. He did the cover. He did the book design. Uh, he's the best graphic designer as far as I'm concerned on the planet. And
Okay.
he did all of it. So it was really a family, and I call her family. Patty's like a sister from another mother. Marco's like a brother from another mother. This was truly a family, and this was a very spirit-driven process. The whole thing was spirit-driven. I mean, we could write a book on how this book came together. But it came together pretty seamlessly. We had an editor, we did everything else, but it was it's something that we are very proud of. We've gotten some very, very good reviews on our website. We've gotten some very good reviews from Amazon. So we're very pleased that individuals who have been reading it have found the book to be beneficial, to be impactful. um, that does our heart good. And that's the story of the book in a nutshell, Jay. In a nutshell.
Well, you know what? Incredible. First off, the whole thing is just just understanding that, like you said, it's family,
Mm-hmm.
and it became family because when over time, over a 10-year period, you build this relationship with Pastor Freno and her husband happens to be a graphic designer.
Yeah.
So it fused every aspect together, and it allowed you to be able to create this dynamic work that will allow you that's allowing two sides.
Mm-hmm.
And not only it's not a comparative of both
No,
sides, it's
no.
a fusion of both sides. And you know, that allows a lot of people to be able to understand on multiple levels. It's interesting because you introduced me to two books that
Mm-hmm.
I've read. And one of them was called Ghost Rider. It was written by Neil Peart
Yep.
and from Rush. And the other one was called Many Minds, Many Masters.
Yep.
And that one was incredibly interesting because it it is the document, Dr. Brian Weiss, it's the document of a psychotherapist
Mm-hmm.
who had a patient who, you know what, Dave, you tell the story because you can tell it probably from more of a scientific point of view.
Well, Brian Weiss he's an MD, he's a psychiatrist. And he wrote the book Many Lives, Many Masters. I think it initially came out in 1986. And then there was a 25-year anniversary edition of that. I believe Dr. Weiss was the medical director. I believe it was at the University of Miami Hospital, and he met a patient whom he called Catherine, who had a variety of mental health challenges. I believe depression, maybe PTSD, and anxiety. And Weiss, in his book, had mentioned that he would do an 18-month program of insight oriented therapy with medication. He presented that to Catherine and said, I want to try this first. If it doesn't work, if it's not helping you meet your goals, I'd like you to consider regression hypnosis. And with regression hypnosis, is a certified hypnotist will bring a person back to an age where they thought trauma first existed, and they'll bring them back to that age, and under hypnosis, and they will record it. They will, you know, they will get some information, and usually will play it back for the client. Usually, and we'll play it back for the client and have a discussion around that. So 18 months later, Catherine had, in Brian Weiss's mind, had not made any significant progress. So he went to regression hypnosis. So he puts her on the table, gets her in a very relaxed state, and says, "I want you to go back to a time that you were," and I'm not sure the exact age. I'm going to say 8 years old. What happened is he ended up regressing her to an entire past lifetime. And so under hypnosis, he discovered that Catherine had her soul had 86 previous adventures, and I'm putting this in my terms, in the human experience. 13 of those lifetimes were unresolved and were impacting on her ability to function in this lifetime. Now, Weiss wasn't sure what he was looking at. He ruled out psychosis because there wasn't any history of psychosis with Catherine. So there was one thing that I think convinced him that what he was looking at was a woman who was under hypnosis, re-experiencing her past lives. Brian Weiss had a child that died, I believe it was 2 years old. He had a congenital heart defect. And I believe the valves in his heart were, when they came in backwards. And he died when I think he was 2 years old. Now, what would happen with Catherine during regression hypnosis? He would advance her to the moment of her death. And what he described happened was that her soul would leave her body and there would be an incubation period or a resting period in between lifetimes. And at that moment, one of the things he also discovered later on in his work is that the soul has free will to reincarnate into the physical experience and contract for specific challenges and, you know, to determine the family they want to be born in, the occupation they want to be in, the challenges they want to experience, who they're going to marry, and how long they are going to be in the human existence for. They can determine all of this. And free will, where the soul has free will to stay in basically eternal energy. So, but he would advance her to the moment of her death. Her soul would be in an incubation period. And during that time, Jay, she would be channeling teachings from what Weiss called highly evolved master spirits. And one of the messages that Weiss got was, and I'm paraphrasing this, was that your son needed to die so you could see the the limitations of Western medicine. And Jay, if there was a mic in 1986, he would have dropped it all over the place. Um, but he would have just dropped it. And his literally his jaw dropped. He had not shared any of that personal information with Catherine. And
Okay.
you know how we want to find out, geez, why did our loved ones have to go, how they went, when they went. And in this lifetime, we've eventually learned that we have to live with unanswered questions. Well, he got a reason that his 2-year-old son needed to transition, to die, so that he could see the limitations of Western medicine. And Catherine was, I believe, the soul that was contracted with Brian Weiss to show him that. And that changed his whole perspective. He's done well at the time. The last time he's had to do probably well over 7,000 regression hypnosis sessions, past life regression hypnosis, and he has a program that certifies individual in past life regression therapy. So, and Weiss's book came up during the weekend with Patty because Patty said, "Do you believe in? Are you familiar with Brian Weiss's work?" And I said, "Yeah, I've read his book." And the nudge that I got from both her and from Janine was, you need to read it again. And when I read it after that weekend, it was like everything just fell into place. Everything just all of a sudden like made sense. I had read it the 3 years into my grief with Janine. I said, that's a great story, but I couldn't really integrate that, much like I could integrate the other stuff that was happening. But after the weekend that I had with Patty, um, I was able to read Weiss's book again, and everything started to make more sense to me.
It's interesting because when you look at the big picture of everything again, it comes back to that comment earlier, serendipitous.
Uh huh.
I'm going to stay on that word because when you look at it in this sense with Dr. Weiss, it is a man who is like yourself, who was had a background in a science-based thought process,
Mm-hmm.
but due to circumstance, there was something unexplainable, and that that unexplainable circumstance led to a series of a whole new chapter in both of your lives. I
Yep.
mean, like I said, in your case, it was investigating both the psychological aspect of things and the spiritual aspects, you know. And in Dr. Weiss's situation, it was, you know what? I know what science tells me,
Mm-hmm.
but Catherine's symptoms are not anything based in science.
No.
And I had to understand. And he used scientific methods
Mm-hmm.
to come up with these particular circumstances. I'm sorry.
No,
Please go
you're
ahead.
fine. No, you're fine. He recorded every session with her. He would play him back with her, and she began to understand why she was experiencing the challenges that she was experiencing this lifetime from what had occurred in previous lifetimes. And once she understood that, Weiss was able to integrate that information into therapy. And he said at the end of her book, and I think this might have been at the 25-year anniversary version, that she seemed to like radiate peace. People were just automatically like attracted to her. I mean, she was really at peace after the past life regression therapy because she understood the information that she had from her past life regression therapy sessions helped her find peace and clarity and resolve whatever issue she was going through in this lifetime. So, um, and there are other individuals. There's another gentleman by the name of Bruce Grayson who wrote a book called After. Now, Bruce Grayson comes from a background where his two parents are chemists. Now, you can't get any more science based than that.
Right. Right.
Okay. But Bruce Grayson wrote a book called After, and Bruce Grayson is the founder of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And they deal with individuals who've had near-death experiences. They've actually experienced their physical death. Their spirit and soul have left their body. They've traveled to the afterlife. They're told that you're going to learn a lot while you're here, but this is not your time. We're going to put you back in your body so that you can complete your mission on Earth. And the studies of near-death experiences kind of found him. He wasn't anything he was looking for, but he became more and more and more and more fascinated. He began to the book After is a great exercise in critical thinking. And one of the things that he said in this book that really stays with me is that if something happens, and again, I'm paraphrasing this, that science can't readily explain, can you find a scientific explanation to account for that? If you can't, can you accept the fact that there, in some circumstances, there may be exceptions to scientific or empirical based criteria? That stayed
Right.
with me. That stayed with me because that's the framework of critical thinking. Okay. For me, you and I could have a totally different perspective on something, Jay, but I'm not going to judge your perspective as wrong. Critical thinking is going to say, okay, let me create some space for this. Let me hear how he came to that point of that point of reference. And now how can what can I integrate that's going to help me further in my development and growth? And that kind of awareness, when we can commit to walking in awareness, as Patty has taught me, that we may not be able to align totally on perspectives that we share, but that we can take bits and pieces of that. That's another product of spiritual growth for me. That
Oh,
creates some more awareness. And also, it creates a world where there's tolerance, there's inclusivity, and we align on shared values and not on the color of our skin, not the culture that we come from. It's basically, and that's the framework that I think critical thinking can allow for. And when we commit to walking in awareness and to learn from each other, that creates a world where we can become more tolerant of each other and more welcoming of each other, which is the world I envision down the road. Maybe not in my lifetime, but down the
right.
road.
Well, you know what? It's interesting that you talk about the whole critical thinking aspect because it's interesting that actually leads into aspects of science that scientists don't use critical thinking to address.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, look, you were a drug and alcohol counselor for years. There may be people who are addicts due to circumstances that happened, and instead of some doctors addressing what may have happened, you're addressing the present symptom,
Yep.
treating that instead of looking at underlying possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
For again, that becomes a lack of critical thinking. Same thing with people that there are professionals who, if a person walks in like Catherine into their office instead of using you know, hypnotic regression therapy, first thing they may do is say, you know what, this person's just crazy, and let me just give them some pills or something like that, you know. And it's interesting. Not to say
Mhm.
it's interesting.
Well, it is, and the thing is that there are individuals that will get diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety, and they'll be put on meds, and that's not who they are.
Right.
Um, there are a lot of the young adults that I've worked with, and also not only do I teach at Utica University, I teach a couple of psychology courses at the Pratt Munson School of Art in Utica, New York. And you want to talk about artists being intuitive and kinesthetic and very multisensory. They are very multisensory and hands-on. And there's a lot of young adults who come in with a lot of intuitive ability, the ability to process information from in multidimensionally. And a lot of times, the body isn't equipped to process information really at light speed and multidimensionally. I mean, the body gets tired after a while when you got all that energy running through it. And those individuals, if they go to a therapist and they just tell them, yeah, I'm feeling anxious and depressed, without telling them that this is why I'm anxious and depressed, or this is the background or the context of why I feel anxious, they're going to be placed on meds, and they don't need to be placed on meds. What they need to is what they need to have is to be supported in terms of looking at the world multidimensionally, giving them some holistic practices like protective white light meditations or yoga or mindfulness activities that can ground them in the present moment. Um, I've talked to a lot of students, several students from who have, after we've had discussions of, about spiritual aspects of death and dying or just spirituality in general, and we talk about the intuitiveness of our young adults today and how that intuitiveness gets diagnosed for a mental health condition. They've come up to me and said, I'm glad we had this conversation. I'm glad you presented this information because this is how I see the world. Now I don't think I'm crazy. And we need to begin, and I tell my students, you need to begin to understand the spiritual aspects of death and dying or spirituality in general, because even if you may not believe in it, by we have to address it. You can't deal with a person holistically. You can deal with their psychological, emotional, and physical well-being, but spirituality, Jay's got to be part of the process.
Right.
There'll be most accrediting agencies, like the Joint Commission for the Accreditation of Hospital Organizations, they mandate that assessment occur on all spheres, including spirituality. So it's now based on doing spiritual assessment and addressing spirituality as part of holistic treatment, and it needs to be.
What's interesting is, I mean, you're looking at a lot of psychologists, therapists, counselors. They're also gaining studies in holistic medicine
Mm-hmm.
and doing things. They're understanding that in addition to it being a mental head circumstance with a person, there's also an emotional heart circumstance, and that emotional circumstance can easily morph into a mental circumstance. So if we can ward off what's going on with the heart, or at least address it,
Mm-hmm.
we have the chance of neutralizing the mental aspects of the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you look at, you know, the DSM pretty much does things like, it's categorized, back to the alcohol and drug thing, it's categorized this as a mental disorder. And it is. But in a lot of situations, it starts off as an emotional, it's
Mm-hmm.
triggered by some kind of emotional event.
Yeah.
And that triggering may lead to the addictive nature.
Mm-hmm. And if there's a genetic predisposition for chemical dependency, or if an individual came from an unhealthy home, they don't have the coping skills and they'll typically self-medicate. And this is another point about addiction. I in the last few years before I retired, I was dealing with a lot of substance users who had unresolved grief issues. And these were individuals that had been in treatment multiple times. And so I would present some, basic, things like journaling, and, I would have them bring in a picture of their loved ones and have them share a story around that so that I could get to understand that person in their eyes. But with an individual who's had multiple bites at the apple for rehabs or treatment, you're not going to be able to do a standard addiction treatment plan with them. They could probably do the psychoeducation part of by heart because they've heard all the lectures.
Right.
So what I find out is, okay, I know what you got in treatment before, but what didn't you get that we need to address now? So we do fill in the blanks. One of the things that was very um, instrumental for them and really was like eye opening is, and this is something that Patty introduced me to in Long Island, were the Native American teachings of animals and nature, particularly two books by Ted Andrews and Jamie Sams. Ted Andrews' Animal Speaks and Jamie Sams' Medicine Cards. So I would have them do some intuitive stuff. I'd give them, we do the Sam's book. I'd have them pick an animal card. We would recite the teaching, and I would say, does this fit? And 9 times out of 10, the card that they drew was meaningful to them in the moment or could have had meaning for them down the road. So I would do things like, say, for example, if they drew a crow card. A crow is multiple different teachings. It's about addressing your fears, adaptability. If you look at crows are both, they'll take anything the earth gives them. They'll
Right.
take vegetation, they'll take meat, they'll take roadkill, they'll take grain. They teach us about adapting and being grateful for what the earth gives us, which as humans, we can learn a lot from that. Watch from crow medicine. Um, but the other part of crow medicine that is big for me is honor the past as your teacher, honor the present as your creation, and honor the future as your inspiration. And one of the things that individuals who are addicted have an issue with is looking at the past, because the past has causes them so much guilt and so much pain. But I explain that your past, the decisions that you made, good or bad, has orchestrated your present. So let's look at the past, see what we can learn from your past so we can apply to the present and then help you create the future of your dreams. But with the animal cards that I had them do, it was like they said, wow, this is really clicking. So what we would do is we would develop like questions around the teachings and see how they could integrate that into their day-to-day lives. Now, is this anything that's evidence-based? No. But was it effective? More effective than the evidence-based approaches that they were exposed to before? Yes, because what was happening, I think a lot of times, you would play the traditional playbook. You do relapse prevention planning, you do symptom management, and that's great to an extent. But when it's not working, what's missing? Is evidence based going to work by itself, or do we need to integrate some more holistic practices into the mix? Now, it could not just be animal medicine, it could be things like integrating yoga, integrating meditation, mindfulness activities. All of these practices have proven to have both positive effects on both mental and physical health.
Well, it's clear because one, um, Eastern medicine, for instance, for centuries, they've been using these practices
Yep.
to address mental health, and it's interesting because you you look at cultures. Cultures have always been strained, no matter what culture you're in, and some practices, the ability to self soothe in some way,
Mhm.
mindfulness practices, yoga, different exercises. It's been proven that some cultures can deal with strenuous situations better than others because of the practices that they have been
Mhm.
introduced to over time. I mean, you look at our culture here in America, you know, because we're now starting to become um, more adaptive
Mhm.
to these different Eastern philosophies, we're starting to see, you know, slight reductions in things. I mean, companies are offering meditation programs. You
Mhm.
know, we're starting to see that there is a value.
Absolutely.
So, let me ask you this. I know that you've been able to kind of use a certain book that you ran upon, and then you ran upon a person who actually committed similar acts. Like the book Ghost Rider I was talking to you about with Neil Peart. And this guy got on his bike, took a ride, did his thing. Then you met a person who simply hopped into their truck and
Mhm.
did something similar.
And I would not um I would not have met him had I not mentioned Neil Peart in my keynote speech in Western Virginia for the bereaved parents of the USA in 2011. I would not have met Neil Peart, or I would not have met my friend Chris Munch, if I didn't mention Neil Peart in the 14th draft of my keynote speech. Um, and their mutual acquaintance came up to me and said, you really ought to check out Chris Munch. So I connected with Chris at the conference. We talked for about 5 minutes and we like hit it off. You like another brother from another mother. Um, and we communicated through text, through email, and finally, I got him down in person to do a conference or to present a workshop for a conference that I've been organizing. And I was laughing. I said, what if we meet each other, we find out we hate each other's guts, after all of this. But as it turned out, we just hit it off. And Chris Munch had a very similar journey after his son Blake transitioned in 2005 and his second marriage broke up. He did what I call the poor man's Neil Peart. Peart did his thing on a BMW motorcycle and traveled 55,000 miles to the United States, Canada, and Mexico to literally find himself after two of the more greatest tragedies in his life in the early 90s when his daughter and his common law wife transitioned within 10 months of each other. Um, so Chris took the back seat out of his Jeep, loaded it with provisions, drove to all 48 states, lower states, and I put a birdhouse up in honor of his son, and that evolved into the first phase of his finding meaning through grief called the Birdhouse Project. Now he's doing more meaningful stuff as an entrepreneur, but also as a teacher. And he does still a lot of talks about grief and working through grief. But had I not mentioned Neil Peart, who I never met, I would have loved to have met him. Had I not mentioned him, I would have never met Chris Munch. So we're going to talk about serendipity again. Um, the different kind of serendipity, but serendipity.
Well, it's what's interesting. I mean, seriously, Dave, what's interesting about all of it is that you're now looking at those unexplainables of the spiritual plane.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you read, this is just an example. You read Ghost Rider. Okay, it's an interesting story. Then, you know what? You're invited to do this keynote speech. And in the keynote speech, you're like, hey, hmm, I can definitely put some Neil Peart information in here.
I did.
When you do, when you do, you come across a person who has done something similarly, and you end up building this relationship over time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, it just goes back to looking at things really in an interesting way the fusion
Yeah.
of. Go ahead.
No. You go. I'm just formulating thoughts. So you keep going.
Now, I'm thinking about like just the incredible fusion that's going on in your mind, where you're like, I've been trained to see this one way, but all these other things are not necessarily disproving the way I have always learned, but
Mhm.
they are literally additions.
Yep.
And I have to not be so rigid now. I have to be more flexible
Oh
to,
yeah.
you know, at least I don't have to accept it all, but to understand it,
Mhm.
and kind of go from there.
Well, here's the other thing. We're going back to Brian Weiss again. And one of the things Brian Weiss talked about in his book was something called soul groups. That we will travel through lifetimes with the same group of souls, but we will contract to be in different relationships. Like, for example, my daughter and I could have been brother and sister in a past lifetime. Okay. You and I could have been brothers in a past lifetime. Um, Neil Peart, Chris Munch, and I could have been connected in some way in a past lifetime, which accounts for all of this. But what Weiss has said is what he learned through his work with Catherine is that the same group of souls in their soul group will travel through lifetimes together. They will contract to be in different relationships, brother, sister, husband, wife, different cultures, different ethnic origins, um, and they will contract for specific challenges in the human experience. So as brother and sisters, let's say if you and I were brothers, our souls would contract that we're going to be doing this. So let's say I wanted to learn something about forgiveness. Okay. Maybe our contract is that um, I get betrayed by somebody who's close to us and you teach me the power of forgiveness. Okay. And that's something that my soul needs to continue to evolve. Um, in a past lifetime, I may have very well been been a child who died, um, and left my mother in that lifetime grieving as a bereaved parent. In this lifetime, for my soul wanted to accept the challenge of being a parent who'd experienced the transition of a child. And there were days, Jay, when I looked up at the sky and said, "What the H is my soul thinking? Why would I even want a contract for this?" But I've discovered that in the human experience, everything that happens to us, good or bad, is for the evolution of our soul. It's for our soul's continued growth. It's for our continued growth. If I could have a say in terms of the challenges that I were going to experience in this lifetime, I would not have contracted for the challenge of losing a child. I would
Right.
have rather had another type of event, spur the perspective that I have on now. However, we have no control over the challenges that are going to befall us. I have learned that life isn't necessarily fair. That leading a good life and an honorable life in the eyes of humankind and God, whatever our beliefs, are not going to insulate you from challenge. The quality of a life is defined by how well we rise to challenge and how well we transcend that and how we find meaning and purpose and service. Long after I transition, I went whatever I have been able to impart on others to go on forever. Um, I realize that I'm not going to go on forever, but hopefully, what I've been able to leave, what I've been able to impart, as far as my what I've learned, can be of help to somebody in future generations down the road. So,
Well, first off, Dave, I want to say thank you so much because I think this is a very insightful conversation. First off, secondly, you were very open in being able to describe exactly how you've been able to integrate
mhm.
your thought process between again your academic background and what you have learned over time spiritually.
Yep.
And when we look at that, I'm just going to say it like this: when people look at that, you're looking, everybody, people are looking at a more open frame of thought now. It's not just one way.
No.
This is not the only way. That's not the only way. It's not just medication, and it's not just meditation. It's a fusion
Mm-hmm.
of science and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say thank you for the incredible conversation that we had. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Roberts. Dave, how can the audience get in touch with you?
Well, you can find me on just most all social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Um, you can go to my personal website, davidrobertsmsw.com, or the author website, psychologyprofessorandminister.com. If you want to, you can find out more about the book there. If you want to check out the book on Amazon and are interested in purchasing it in either Kindle or paperback format, you can go to Amazon. I know you've been streaming the link for the audience, but you can just go on Amazon and search either by author name, either Dave Roberts or Patty Farino, or just by the title, When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. I also have a podcast, the Teaching Journeys podcast, which is on Apple, Spotify, and also on YouTube. So if you want to check it out and follow, listen to, check out the podcast. And Jay's going to be a guest for on that podcast in August, on my podcast in August. So I'm looking forward to another great conversation. So you can find me a variety of different ways. I'm not hard to find.
Hey, you know what? I appreciate that because one, we need people like you who have the ability to be able to walk both paths and who can use empathy
Mm-hmm.
to be able to have a conversation with the person that's hurting.
Yep.
Look, I tell everybody all the time, grief is one of the most powerful emotions that we deal with. What we can do is learn how to use that to our advantage, but it takes people like yourself to be able to help walk people through the challenging periods so that you can teach them that no, they have the ability to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
They have the ability. You just have to, take a second to
Yep.
be able to give them that kind of time. So again, look, Professor Dave Roberts, I absolutely appreciate the time that you've given me. And I'm sure that the audience has learned so much. And again, I'm going to rebroadcast this. So I'm going to make sure that this is going out there to the world and people are doing it. A friend of mine, Michael Gersey,
Yep.
a friend of ours. Michael, he's a great discussion. I really listen, I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you so much. But the point I'm making is again, like I said,
Thanks,
this
Michael.
incredible opportunity. Now, he's another one I'm going to have on my show.
Oh,
And
he's great. I've had him on my podcast. I'm having him back again. He's great. He's got a great story. He's a great person. He's got a great sense of humor. He's just doing some really impactful stuff. That's a conversation that hopefully I'll be able to tune in live.
seriously. But like I said, thank you so much for your time and thank you for everything, Dave. I really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, come back. Come back to the show, The Grief Empowerment Theory. My name's Jay. Again, y'all have a great day.
Bye bye, everybody.
All right.